And today, our focus is, well, it's literally about mapping, but it's mapping with this incredible sense of urgency that you just don't see in most scientific projects these days.
Right. We're talking about a massive, audacious global mission that's happening right now, led by archaeologists and geoscientists.
It is a genuine race against time to digitally map and, preserve huge portions of the ancient world before they're just gone,
Gone for good.
irrevocably destroyed, whether it's from climate change, relentless urban expansion, or, just plain natural decay.
This really feels like high-stakes history. We've entered this era where buried cities, these ancient landscapes, they're becoming inaccessible, or they're just vanishing altogether.
Yeah, and the sources we pulled together for this, they paint this really vivid picture of archaeologists basically trading in their trowels and brushes for electromagnetic scanners and drone-mounted lasers.
It's a huge technological revolution, but one that's born out of necessity.
Completely. And so this deep dive is really built around the sources that detail these technologies, making it all possible. We're talking primarily about ground-penetrating radar, or GPR, and then the massive coverage you get with LiDAR.
And it's not just the tech, it's the monumental scale of the global projects that are already underway, and maybe most importantly, the really profound ethical questions that this sudden flood of digital data raises.
Exactly. So the core mission for us today is to really understand this fundamental shift in methodology. We're moving away from the traditional physical excavation.
Which is slow.
So slow,
And
expensive, and it's inherently destructive. You can only dig a site once.
Right. And now we're moving towards digital excavation. The goal is to map, model, and preserve entire lost cities, entire landscapes, without ever putting a shovel in the ground.
And in doing so, achieving a clarity and a scope that was, it was just unimaginable even a decade ago.
So for you, the listener, our goal today is to give you clarity on these three big pillars of modern archaeology. The cutting-edge tech itself, the sheer scale of these global initiatives, and then why these new ethical frameworks, things like data sovereignty, are now just absolutely critical.
Critical to make sure this digital revolution actually serves the communities whose heritage is being preserved.
Okay, so let's start by establishing the stakes. Why this intense pressure right now? I mean, archaeological sites, they've always been vulnerable. What's different? Why is this generation facing down this accelerating clock?
The threats are, they're no longer just localized. They're systemic, and they're all interconnected. That's the big change. We're facing these unprecedented challenges from accelerating climate change.
Okay, like what specifically?
Well, think about rising sea levels just eating away at coastal sites around the world,
Mm-hmm.
or the permafrost thaw in the Arctic regions. That risks this catastrophic loss of organic artifacts, things like wood, leather, even bodies, that have been perfectly preserved for millennia.
Wow.
And at the same time, you've got global population growth and the urban sprawl that comes with it. It's just rapidly flattening unrecorded sites under new buildings, new roads. If we don't document them now, they will be gone forever. There's no second chance.
And this sense of urgency, it's forced archaeologists to be proactive, right? They can't just wait around for funding for a traditional dig anymore.
They can't. And we see this illustrated perfectly in a project in Italy called Sotto Siena.
Under Siena.
Exactly. And it cleverly abbreviates to SOS, Under Siena.
That's very on the nose.
It is, isn't it? And this project, it's led by an archaeologist named Stefano Campana, and it just perfectly captures this dual nature of both the crisis and the opportunity we're talking about.
So what's the goal of SOS?
The project is aiming to survey all the accessible land beneath the city of Siena, which holds these incredible layers of habitations stretching back, for millennia.
And the sources we read made it clear this isn't just some academic exercise in a lab. This is practical urban management, right?
Precisely. The project is, yes, it's cataloging Etruscan and Roman strata, but it's just as focused on documenting this incredibly complex tapestry of modern infrastructure.
You mean like pipes and wires?
The pipes, the utility lines, the sewers, all the undocumented modern history that's sitting right on top of the deeper ancient history.
And that's where the urgent need for preservation meets this really practical modern application.
It connects the past to the present instantly. Modern infrastructure is both a threat to the ancient remains below it, but it's also a point of vulnerability for the city itself today.
I had never thought of it that way.
If you know where centuries of different utility lines are buried, you can do responsible urban planning. You minimize risk during modern construction. It even helps with public safety. The goal is mapping the past to manage the threats of the future and the demands of the present.
This pressure then has just completely shifted the scope of what it means to be an archaeologist. We're moving from, say, mapping a single burial mound to mapping entire cities.
That is the radical scaling up that figures like Imotrinks have been championing. The methodology had to change because the ambition just expanded exponentially.
So the old goal was finding and digging a site.
Right. And the new mandate is documentation and preservation of the entire context. As Trinks put it, the goal is to map an entire city. You are mapping an entire landscape and beyond. And that just demands non-invasive methods that can cover massive areas efficiently.
And the staggering scale of what remains unexcavated, I mean, that really drives home why this digital transformation is so necessary. We have this unbelievable example of the Roman city of Carnuntum.
The statistic on Carnuntum is one of those facts that it recontextualizes the entire field of archaeology. It's estimated that 99% of the city remains unexcavated.
99%.
99%. Only a tiny fraction, 1%, has ever been physically dug up.
So wait. That means that virtually everything we understand about its street grid, the urban layout, the extent of the city, its very definition, is based not on what some crew uncovered with shovels, but on digital models.
Digital models derive from electromagnetic technology, yes.
That fundamentally changes the nature of history, doesn't it?
It introduces this immense epistemological shift. Our knowledge is now mediated by the machine. We are moving away from history being defined purely by positivism, what we physically dug up, to being based heavily on interpretation, on what the machine told us based on these subsurface anomalies.
So what are the immediate consequences of that? Of history being 99% digital inference versus 1% physical object?
Well, it elevates the importance of verification, of methodological rigor. Archaeologists have to be so vigilant about machine reliability and how they're interpreting the data.
You can't just trust the black box.
You can't. When your entire understanding of a city's layout relies on, essentially, radar blurs, you have to verify those readings. And that's why what they call the medical biopsy approach is still so vital.
A medical biopsy.
Doing small, targeted physical excavations to confirm that the geophysical data, those radar blurs, correlates accurately to real physical structures underground. It provides the ground truth for that other 99% of digital extrapolation.
And yet sometimes the data captures things that physical excavation simply can't. Which brings us to this fascinating idea, this invisible house paradox.
This anecdote is just a perfect illustration of the power of remote sensing. It comes from an archaeologist, Eileen Ernenwein. She was doing graduate research at an indigenous site in New Mexico.
Okay.
And using magnetic surveying, she found this really clear evidence pointing to the remnants of severely eroded house walls.
But if the walls were physically eroded, why did the magnetic survey pick them up? What was it seeing?
That's the key. Even when the physical structure itself, the mud, the timber, has basically dissolved or eroded away, the process of occupation leaves behind this distinct chemical and thermal signature in the soil.
A ghost in the soil.
A permanent detectable ghost. Fires, cooking, specific human activities. They change the magnetic properties and the chemistry of the earth around them.
So she knew this ghost of a structure was there in the data. What happened when she actually went to dig?
Well, when she excavated the area, she realized the physical structure was so degraded, so ephemeral, that if they had relied purely on traditional excavation, they would have likely missed the site entirely.
Wow.
There was no clear structural line left to see with the human eye or feel with a trowel. The magnetic signature was the only definitive proof it had ever been there.
So the invisible house paradox proves that remote sensing isn't just a shortcut. It's not just about speed.
Not at all. It's a way to find evidence that is physically real in the subsurface, but is just too subtle or too ephemeral for our traditional methods to detect. It's seeing what's invisible.
The need is clear then. We need urgent, large-scale, and non-invasive ways to find these invisible houses and to map that 99% that remains underground. So let's unpack the core machinery making this digital revolution possible, starting with the indispensable workhorse, ground-penetrating radar, or GPR.
GPR has become standard practice for a very good reason. It is by far the most widely used, non-invasive, and non-destructive geophysical method available for characterizing archaeological sites. It's like a high-resolution X-ray machine for the Earth.
What gives GPR its edge over other methods like, say, magnetic surveys or electrical resistivity?
Its core strength is its resolution, assuming you have suitable soil and rock conditions. GPR offers the highest resolution for subsurface mapping, which makes it ideal for these very pinpoint tasks.
Like what?
like precisely locating buried foundations, finding individual artifacts, and critically accurately delineating the outline of ancient graves and tomb structures before you ever interact with them physically.
Let's define the operational parameters here. What kind of depth are we talking about, and what are the limitations?
Typically, its useful depth range falls somewhere between 1 and 10 meters, but that depth depends heavily on the ground. Material clay is tough, sand is easy, and the frequency you're using.
Okay, so there's an inverse relationship here, right?
Exactly. It's crucial to understand that. High-frequency antennas, like a 500 or 700 megahertz, they give you fantastic centimeter-scale resolution, but they only penetrate shallowly, maybe 1 or 2 meters deep.
And the lower frequencies?
Conversely, lower-frequency antennas, say 100 or 50 megahertz, can penetrate much deeper, maybe 10 meters or even more, but the resolution you get is coarser. You lose that fine detail.
So you're choosing your antenna based on whether you want a broad, deep overview or a high-definition close-up of something shallow.
Exactly right. You tailor the tool to the target. And because GPR surveys are safe, they're economical, they're environmentally friendly, they've been universally adopted for that initial site characterization before any development or, potentially destructive excavation is planned.
And the processing has gotten better, too.
Oh, massively. The advancements in signal processing now allow us to translate that raw data into these incredibly accurate 2D and 3D models of whatever's buried down there.
Okay, let's peel back the physics a bit. How does GPR actually image the invisible? What's happening in the ground?
So GPR works by transmitting these short, high-frequency electromagnetic pulses into the ground. It does that through a surface antenna that you basically drag across the ground.
Okay.
When those waves encounter a boundary or a transition, we call it a discontinuity, a portion of that energy is reflected back to a receiving antenna on the surface.
And what creates a discontinuity that's strong enough to bounce a signal back?
It's essentially any boundary where the electrical or magnetic properties of the material change. The EM pulse travels at a speed that depends on the material's dielectric properties. So a strong reflection happens when there's a significant change in the medium.
Like soil meeting a limestone foundation.
Perfect example. Or sand meeting a metal artifact.
Yeah.
Even just a shift in water content can create a reflection.
So a large void space, like an air-filled tomb or a tunnel, that must generate an extremely strong, clear signal.
Absolutely. Because air and soil have vastly different dielectric properties. Void spaces, in burials, tombs, caches, tunnels, they generate particularly significant radar reflections. The speed of the wave changes so dramatically when it moves from soil into air that it creates a very distinct, very clear signature that flags the presence of an open space.
How does that raw reflection data then get translated into the images that archaeologists can actually interpret?
The data is recorded as two primary parameters. You've got the vertical axis, which represents the two-way travel time of the reflected wave.
How long it took to go down and come back up.
Exactly. And the horizontal axis represents the surface location as the antenna moves across this pre-planned grid.
So time translates to depth.
Correct. Because we know the speed of the wave in the known material, the soil, we can mathematically convert that travel time into an approximate depth. And when these raw, two-dimensional profiles are displayed, strong reflections, the significant anomalies, they generate distinct dark black bands, while medium reflections might be lighter gray bands.
And you just stack them all together.
You collect thousands of these traces along a systematic grid, and then you can synthesize these 2D slices into comprehensive 3D models.
All right, let's move to some case studies to really see this process in action. Let's start with the mapping of the Kofun burial in Japan. This illustrates a really critical concept, the time slice.
Yes, the Kofun burial, which dates to the 6th century AD in Miyazaki Prefecture, Japan. It's a perfect example of advanced GPR data visualization. Rather than just relying on those vertical profiles we just talked about, the researchers processed the GPR data to display what they call constant time slices.
Okay, explain this digital layer cake for us.
Think of the entire data set as a cube. A vertical profile is like looking at one side of that cube. A constant time slice is slicing the cube horizontally at a specific depth band.
Ah, I see.
So instead of looking from top to bottom, you're looking straight down at the entire survey area, but you're only visualizing the data from, say, 0 to 18 centimeters deep. Then the next slice is 18 to 36 centimeters, and so on, all the way down.
Which would make the features instantly recognizable from an aerial view.
It does. By viewing the site layer by layer digitally, you can clearly delineate the overall shape, the orientation, the structure of the buried tomb. You see the walls, the extent of the burial chamber, any associated features. This visualization technique is what turns that abstract reflection data into clear, recognizable architectural forms that can then guide preservation and any potential excavation strategies.
Okay, so moving from tombs to larger urban structures, let's look at the Olordola archaeological site in Spain. Here, they use GPR to map an ancient Iberian wall system.
Right, at Olordola, the primary target was a very specific, very large feature, a buried Iberian wall. It was estimated to be about 1.5 to 2 meters thick.
A big target.
A very big target.
Yeah.
So the GPR survey acquired data in these parallel profiles, and then they used that same amplitude time slice analysis, generating slices at short 4 nanosecond intervals.
And why was that visualization effort so important there?
It was a hugely successful application because not only was the thick defining wall clearly detected, but the analysis also picked up anomalies that corresponded to much thinner interior partitions.
Oh, interesting.
The researchers were able to use the time slices to visualize the precise location, depth, size, and shape of all these radar anomalies at the same time.
And the size of that main wall, 1.5 to 2 meters, how does that relate back to the physics of the wave?
That's a great question. It really links the theory to the practice. That wall thickness was approximated as being about 3.75 to 5 times the wavelength of the radar signal they were using. And GPR has this general rule of thumb that it can detect objects whose size is close to the wavelength of the signal. But here, they were also able to detect much smaller anomalies, which just emphasizes the technique's versatility in mapping this complex, segmented architectural history.
So that sounds like a pretty ideal archaeological application. You have nice, clear boundaries, probably relatively homogeneous soil. What happens when GPR is applied to the chaotic environment of a modern historical building, where you have all these conflicting, undocumented materials? The sources highlight the Industrial School of Barcelona.
And this is where we hit the real challenge of complexity. Applying GPR to cultural heritage structures in these urban settings, it often involves inherently complex radar imaging because buildings go through years, sometimes centuries, of undocumented structural modifications.
And the Industrial School of Barcelona was a prime example.
It was a particularly heterogeneous mess.
Yeah.
They were mixing ancient brick vaults with modern concrete beams. Just a nightmare scenario for clean signals.
All that clutter must dramatically affect the resolution you can actually achieve.
It does. The complexity of the medium often means that the resolution you get in the field is much, much lower than the theoretical optimum values that you get from laboratory tests using simple, uniform media like sand or water.
So that's the reality check for GPR practitioners.
It is. However, the study still yielded some astonishing results by focusing on the boundary conditions.
Okay, what did they manage to detect in that complex, messy, structural environment?
They managed to detect incredibly small discontinuities, tiny gaps between bricks that were less than 1 centimeter thick.
Less than a centimeter.
Less than a centimeter. And furthermore, they detected small utility ducts, about 5 centimeters in size, that were embedded within the structure itself.
Less than a centimeter discontinuity detected through brick and concrete. That is a remarkable demonstration of precision. How is that level of detail even possible when the physical structures are so messy?
It all comes down to focusing on the edges. The detection of those extremely small elements, like those 5 centimeter ducts, which were only about 0.3 times the radar wavelength, it was largely successful because the GPR wasn't just reflecting off the center of the duct.
It was seeing boundaries.
It was picking up the intense reflection generated by the edges and the corners of the feature, which were about 1.1 times the wavelength.
So it's not just seeing the substance of the thing, it's seeing the hard boundary where the material suddenly shifts.
Exactly. The reflection is strongest where the wave encounters a sharp corner or a really dramatic shift in impedance. And that knowledge that GPR excels at resolving targets based on their boundary conditions and edges is absolutely crucial for reliably interpreting the complex radar images you find in architectural heritage surveys.
So the study confirmed that even though real-world conditions compromise the optimum resolution,
the principle of boundary reflection allows for detection that's far more precise than you might anticipate, which gives us the confidence to rely on these scans for really critical, high-definition structural analysis.
Okay, so GPR gives us this incredible centimeter-level precision below ground. It's essential for detailed mapping. But if the mission is to map entire landscapes, entire continents, we need technology that moves with speed and covers exponentially more ground.
Yes, and this brings us to the global, multi-million-dollar initiatives that are leveraging LiDAR.
The sheer scale of these projects is truly It's astronomical. It represents a fundamental shift in how archaeology is done.
It really does. We have to start by discussing the LiDAR initiative. This is a massive 5-year, $10 million project funded by the HITS Foundation, and it's led by Global Digital Heritage and an archaeologist named Herbert Mashner.
$10 million is a statement. What is LiDAR's strategic objective, and why is LiDAR the tool of choice for them?
So LiDAR is focused on expanding high-resolution LiDAR mapping in regions that are traditionally just, incredibly challenging for ground surveys. Specifically, heavily forested areas where ancient features are completely hidden beneath the canopy.
And they do this with airborne or drone-mounted LiDAR.
That's right.
Okay, so let's explain LiDAR simply. It's using light and time to map distance. But how does the light get through a thick forest canopy?
And that is the magic of LiDAR in a dense jungle environment. LiDAR, which stands for light detection, and ranging it pulses millions of laser shots downward from the plane or the drone.
And a lot of those are going to hit leaves and branches?
Most of them will, but a statistically significant portion of those millions of pulses manages to penetrate the gaps in the foliage and actually reach the forest floor.
And crucially, the system records multiple returns for a single laser pulse, doesn't it?
Yes, that's the key. The system records the time it takes for every reflection to return from the treetop, from middle layer of vegetation, and most importantly, the final return from the actual ground surface.
And then software does the rest.
Sophisticated filtering algorithms then digitally strip away all the vegetation data points, and what you're left with is this remarkably detailed, bare earth 3D topographic map.
It's like you're digitally clearing the jungle in a matter of minutes.
Exactly. As Marcello Canuto, who's the director of Tulane's Middle American Research Institute, noted, this technology allows archaeologists to analyze these vast, complex landscapes in minutes instead of years.
That's an incredible acceleration.
It achieves a clarity and a coverage that would have been, and I'm quoting here, unimaginable just a few years ago. It's effectively accelerating the speed of documentation by orders of magnitude.
And this isn't just a localized study in one jungle. LiDAR is operating across multiple continents.
Its global scope is immense. They were mapping critical sites in Italy, Malawi, South Africa, Central America, the Amazon Basin, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Jordan, Spain, and Albania.
Wow.
And Herbert Mashner, the lead, he views this as a vital step in democratizing high-tech archaeology. It's about giving scholars and, importantly, origin communities around the world the ability to rapidly rediscover and protect their cultural heritage before it vanishes.
Okay, so beyond LiDAR, there's another massive global project that's tackling the issue of urgent threats to sites in regions that are often affected by conflict or insecurity. That's the MENA project.
Yes, EMA. The Endangered Archaeology of the Middle East and North Africa project. It was established back in 2015, led by the University of Oxford.
And its core mission?
Detailed, large-scale documentation. They are recording archaeological sites, many of which have never been recorded before, throughout the vast Mid-Nile region.
And given the scale and often the security restrictions in that part of the world, they must rely heavily on satellite remote sensing.
Precisely. They use high-resolution satellite imagery as their primary tool for any new survey work. The goal is documentation, but it's also monitoring. They aim to provide local heritage authorities with essential data for tracking threats.
Threats from what?
Whether it's from conflict, from development, looting, or environmental degradation, the data helps them prioritize their incredibly scarce resources.
The challenge there, even more so than with LiDAR, must be data management. I mean, they're accumulating vast quantities of data on tens of thousands of sites. How do you standardize all that information and, crucially, make it accessible?
They employ a very sophisticated, customized open-access online database. It uses a platform called Arches, specifically version 5.2. And this platform is a purpose-built system just for heritage documentation.
What makes it so good for this?
It supports highly flexible data structuring, seamless integration with GIS systems for mapping, and critically for a project of this scale, it has capabilities for multilinguality and the bulk uploading of site information.
So EMENA isn't just finding sites, it's building the entire digital infrastructure that's necessary for the holistic, long-term maintenance and interoperability of that heritage data on a global scale.
Absolutely. It ensures that the knowledge they're gleaning from remote sensing isn't just siloed in one university lab somewhere. It's accessible, it's interoperable, and it supports the ongoing documentation and analysis of all this cultural, environmental, and geospatial data by multiple stakeholders across multiple countries.
These initiatives are enormous. They require monumental financial support, often for very targeted, urgent work. What kind of financial ecosystem is supporting this? this frantic, high-tech race to map the past.
Organizations like the American Society of Overseas Research, or ASR, and the International Society for Archaeological Prospection, ISAP, are just vital. They provide that necessary capital injection.
It's not a small amount.
Not at all. Since 2007, ASOR alone has awarded close to $1 million, over $986,000, to researchers and students through various grants and scholarships.
That $1 million figure shows a real institutional commitment. But let's talk about the funds that are specifically designed for that race against time component, the emergency response grants.
Right. ASO's Shepherd Urgent Action Grants are the financial mechanism that's tailored for that very urgency. They are specifically established for emergency documentation, stabilization, or excavation at sites in the greater Mediterranean region that face an imminent threat.
So you can get money fast if a site is suddenly in danger.
That's the idea. They accept applications on a rolling basis, and they provide quick turnaround responses, 4 to 6 weeks, with grant amounts up to $10,000. This is the financial lifeline that's designed to match the reactive, immediate nature of preservation when disaster or development suddenly strikes.
And ISAP, the International Society for Archaeological Prospection, they highlight the fact that these projects rarely rely on just one piece of technology, right? They emphasize integrating multiple techniques.
We see that synergy repeatedly in the research they fund. For example, grants have supported multi-method geophysical investigations of massive features like Roman aqueducts.
How would that work?
Well, they might start with a gradiometer survey to quickly delimit the physical extent of the feature over a large area. Then, they'd follow that with a targeted application of GPR at multiple frequencies, say a 100, 250, and 500 megahertz antenna, and then maybe Earth resistance to examine the subsurface character, like the integrity of the aqueduct's mortar.
So they're using the magnetic survey for the broad outlines, and then they deploy the GPR precisely where they need the highest detail about structural integrity. It's a really efficient deployment of resources.
Precisely. And another powerful example is the work at the Medzhez Fortress in Ukraine. Here, they used a GPR system with a 300 megahertz antenna to map these medieval and early modern structures that were buried under a 3-meter-thick layer of soil.
Okay.
Then they switched to a 700 megahertz antenna, that higher frequency, lower penetration, one for ultra-high resolution examination right by the floors of the wall buildings in the church.
So they're essentially using the 300 megahertz like a medium-range cannon to find the boundaries of the walls?
Yeah.
And the 700 megahertz like a high-powered microscope to examine the small features inside.
It's a perfect analogy. And this strategic integration of technology ensures the resulting 3D models and depth slices are as accurate as they can possibly be for any future restoration planning. It really proves that the solution to mapping the ancient world isn't a single piece of hardware. It's a comprehensive, adaptive, and synergistic approach to gathering data.
We've established the critical urgency, the immense global scale, and the phenomenal technological precision that's required for this digital revolution. But we have to transition now to what is probably the most challenging and perhaps the most vital aspect of this entire endeavor, the ethics.
Yes.
If we're creating these permanent, high-definition digital records of global heritage, we have to talk about who owns that data, who controls its use, and who benefits from it.
Absolutely. The digitization of cultural heritage, and particularly indigenous heritage, generates these massive data sets that are inherently imbued with traditional living knowledge.
Right.
And if this digital revolution is meant to be a preservation tool, it has to prioritize these critical ethical discussions beyond just technical feasibility. We have to ensure it doesn't just become a digital perpetuation of colonial practices.
And this issue often stems from challenging the default model of digital preservation that's currently in use.
Yes. The prevalent model in so many scientific and open data frameworks, particularly in European praxis, is the creator-owner model.
Explains that.
It assigns ownership and control of the digital asset, the LiDAR point cloud, the 3D model, the GPR scan data, to the individual or the institution that created that digital data.
And why is that model so deeply problematic when you're dealing with cultural and indigenous heritage?
Because it completely fails to acknowledge that the scanned object or the surveyed site carries inherent cultural and indigenous knowledge, regardless of who was holding the scanner.
The act of scanning doesn't transfer the knowledge?
Not at all. It doesn't transfer the intrinsic cultural knowledge that's associated with that site or artifact to the scanner operator or the archiving institution. Even collection pieces that were removed decades ago still retain indigenous knowledge that has to be fully interpreted in a culturally specific context. It's a process often called knowledge repatriation.
So the creator-owner model just perpetuates an exclusion of the origin community from control over their own cultural narrative, but just in a new digital format.
Precisely. And this is why the entire conversation has to shift to center the principles of self-determination. We have to focus on Indigenous data governance, IDG, and Indigenous Data Sovereignty, IDS.
Okay, define Indigenous data sovereignty for us.
So IDS is the inherent right of Indigenous peoples and tribes to govern the collection, the ownership, and the application of their own data.
It's rooted in sovereignty.
Exactly. It's rooted in recognizing their inherent sovereignty and self-determination, and it ensures that Indigenous communities can reclaim and reintegrate knowledges that were historically separated from them through colonial practices. It allows them to control the narrative and the application of their digital heritage.
And this necessity for control led to the creation of specific guiding principles for this type of data, right? Designed to work alongside the existing scientific standards.
That's right. So while the general scientific data community operates under what are called the FAIR principles.
Findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable.
Exactly. But Indigenous communities realize that those FAIR principles often prioritized maximum openness, which could actually be detrimental to their cultural patrimony.
So they created their own.
They created the CARE principles to accompany and, frankly, to critique the existing framework.
Okay, so what does CARE stand for, and how does it balance that need for both accessibility and protection?
CARE stands for Collective Benefit, Authority to Control, Responsibility, and Ethics.
So where FAIR focuses on data used by researchers.
CARE focuses on the data being used in a way that benefits the origin community. That's collective benefit. And it grants the community the power to decide who uses it and how. That's authority to control.
And responsibility and ethics.
They mandate that researchers use the data ethically and ensure that there's community engagement throughout the entire data lifecycle, from beginning to end.
So if a large institution like eAmina or LiDAR is committed to these principles, what does the implementation of that actually look like on the ground? How do you transition from that creator-owner model to community authority?
The proposed necessary framework is the co-production of knowledge, or CPK framework. And CPK demands much more than just simple consultation. It emphasizes research equity, reciprocity, and mutual respect.
That sounds like it would take a lot of time.
It requires establishing deep, long-term relationships with Indigenous communities, built on trust, which, you're right, takes significant time and resources.
And this commitment has to begin at the very earliest stage of the project.
Crucially, yes. The consultation has to start from the planning phase, before the first GPR scan is even scheduled, to avoid making these presumptive assumptions about data creation or access or sharing. The Indigenous community must be the one to determine the data access levels based on their specific cultural protocols and needs.
So access could range from completely restricted to fully open, and it's based on the community's decision.
Exactly. For some data, access might be highly restricted. Maybe it's only available to designated origin community members or elders or scholars who are working under very specific negotiated agreements.
But if for other data,
For other non-sensitive data, it might be freely shared as open access. The critical point is that the community holds the authority to decide what should and should not be documented, modeled, and archived in the first place.
can you give us an example of what they might restrict beyond the obvious, like human remains?
Oh, absolutely. It extends to the documentation of culturally sensitive objects, or even architectural layouts that contain ancestral knowledge. Perhaps the specific orientation of a ceremonial structure, or details about the location of sacred caches. Documenting that knowledge digitally and then making it openly available risks exposing proprietary cultural information. And therefore, communities must have the right to place a moratorium on its digital capture or release. Without CPK and data sovereignty, we risk this digital revolution becoming just a new form of digital alienation.
And this entire issue of control is becoming even more complex now because of the rapid rise of generative artificial intelligence, or GAI.
GAI poses serious and often really unpredictable challenges to data protection, even when you have stringent access restrictions theoretically in place. GAI tools and advanced algorithms are making it increasingly easy to obtain high-quality 3D models from online platforms without proper authorization.
Okay, so if the data isn't available for a direct download, how does GAI bypass those restrictions? What are the scraping mechanics here?
Well, algorithms can automate the scraping or the ripping of visible or semi-visible data that's uploaded to cloud-based viewing servers. So even when you only allow a user to view a rotating 3D model in a browser,
The GAI can still get it.
GAI can analyze the geometry, the texture, and the shading from multiple angles and potentially reverse engineer the underlying mesh or point cloud data to recreate a high-quality model,
Which could then be used to create physical replicas via 3D printing.
even if the origin community restricted access precisely to prevent that fabrication and unauthorized replication.
So the very tools we're using to digitally save the past are simultaneously creating these unprecedented pathways for its misuse and unauthorized reproduction.
It creates an information arms race. Defense measures have to be implemented aggressively, things like meticulous metadata tagging that defines the licensing restrictions very clearly, implementing technological defenses like data watermarking, and employing expert data management specialists who are dedicated to analyzing and mitigating these risks.
We have to analyze the consequences.
We have to analyze the potential consequences, like the unethical repurposing of indigenous 3D data, to ensure that these technological advancements are pursued responsibly and respectfully.
This deep dive has spanned millennia, tracing the urgency of this monumental mission to map the ancient world before it disappears. We've seen the extraordinary precision of ground-penetrating radar, capable of resolving centimeter-thick discontinuities in these really complex historical sites.
And we explored the unprecedented scale of LiDAR, mapping entire forested continents in minutes, driven by these multi-million-dollar global initiatives.
We saw that this urgency is rooted in the alarming reality that 99% of some ancient cities is known only through a digital signal, which highlights this huge epistemological shift from a history based on excavation to a history based on interpretation.
And we learned that the successful deployment of all this technological capacity requires an equally robust commitment to ethical stewardship.
Right. The ultimate success of this audacious plan, it depends not just on the machines, but on the ethics. Specifically, moving beyond that inadequate creator-owner model and embracing frameworks like Indigenous Data Sovereignty and the CARE principles.
Because that's what ensures that this digital revolution serves as a tool for empowerment and knowledge repatriation, rather than becoming a new avenue for cultural appropriation.
If we fail to embed these ethical safeguards, we risk turning these incredible high-definition data sets into just a new form of digital alienation. We'd be perpetuating historical imbalances in the virtual realm.
The challenge is ensuring that the people whose past is being mapped have the ultimate authority to determine its future.
So let's leave you with this provocative thought, something to reflect on long after this deep dive concludes. Think back once more to that invisible house, the site where the physical walls were so eroded that only the magnetic data confirmed their existence. If the physical ruin has completely vanished, and the sophisticated digital map, the 3D model, the radar image, the metadata is the only authoritative record we possess, then does that maintained, shared digital record itself constitute the artifact?
And if that digital map is the artifact, then the core question becomes the very essence of data sovereignty. Who truly owns that knowledge? Who is responsible for the immense long-term costs of its maintenance and its accessibility? And who has the ultimate authority to determine if or how it is used by future generations? That is the biggest, most expensive excavation challenge facing us today.
Food for thought indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into mapping the ancient world.